I was staring at my phone in disbelief when the squad car pulled into my driveway at 8 in the morning on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in Scottsdale, Arizona. The notification from my smart doorbell had already told me someone was approaching, and now 2 uniformed officers were walking up my front path like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. All I had done was install a few security cameras around my property, but apparently that was enough to warrant a police visit in the Desert Ridge Estates, HOA. My name is Connor Iverson, and I had moved into this planned community 6 months ago after landing a software engineering job at a tech startup in Phoenix. The house was beautiful, a modern 4-bedroom with clean lines and desert landscaping, and I had been thrilled to finally own property instead of throwing money away on rent. What I had not anticipated was becoming the target of the most insufferable HOA president in the history of homeowner associations. I opened the door before the officers could knock, my smartwatch already showing me their body cam footage through my integrated security system. Yeah, I know that sounds excessive, but I work in cybersecurity and home automation. This is literally what I do for a living. Connor Iverson, the taller officer asked, his hand resting casually near his belt. That's me. What's this about? The shorter officer, a woman with sharp eyes, consulted her notepad. We received a complaint from your HOA president, a Karen Rothwell. She claims you have installed surveillance equipment that violates community guidelines and potentially invades the privacy of your neighbors. I felt my jaw tighten. Karen Rothwell had been a thorn in my side since the day I moved in. She was exactly what her name suggested, a 50-something woman with an aggressively styled blonde bob and an apparent vendetta against anyone who did not follow her interpretation of the HOA rules to the letter. She had already sent me 3 violation notices for things like leaving my garage door open for 15 minutes while I unloaded groceries and parking my car 6 inches too far forward in my own driveway. Officers, I have not violated any laws. The cameras on my property are completely legal and are only monitoring my own space. They are pointed at my doors, my driveway, and my backyard. I am not recording anything beyond my property lines. The female officer nodded slowly. Do you mind showing us? I stepped outside, gesturing to the discrete cameras mounted near my front door, above my garage, and on the corners of the house. These are Ring cameras and some custom setups I built myself. They are motion activated, they only record my property, and they are clearly visible, which is actually a legal requirement in Arizona. I am not hiding them or trying to spy on anyone. The male officer walked around, examining the angles. They look pretty standard to me. We see these on houses all over the valley. That's because they are legal, I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Karen Rothwell does not like them because she thinks they make the neighborhood look too modern or something. But there is nothing in the actual HOA bylaws that prohibits security cameras. The female officer made a note. Have you checked your HOA documents? I have done more than check them. I have practically memorized them. The only mention of exterior modifications requires pre-approval for structural changes, or anything that significantly alters the appearance of the property. These cameras are small, neutral-colored, and completely in line with what dozens of other homes in this community have installed. The officers exchanged a glance. The male one shrugged. Sir, we do not see any criminal activity here. This sounds like a civil matter between you and your HOA. We would recommend you work it out with them or consult an attorney if it escalates. So I am not in any legal trouble. Not from a criminal standpoint. The cameras are legal in Arizona as long as they are not pointed into areas where people have a reasonable expectation of privacy, like your neighbor's bedroom windows. From what we can see, you are in the clear. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Karen had called the cops on me for something she knew was not illegal. This was harassment, plain and simple. After the officers left, I marched inside and pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer. I had read them before, but now I was going to document every single line that proved I was in the right. My phone buzzed with a notification from my smart home system. Karen Rothwell was standing on my doorstep. I took a deep breath and opened the door. She stood there in a crisp white blouse and khaki capris, her arms crossed and her expression radiating smugness. "I see the police paid you a visit," she said without preamble. "They did, and they confirmed what I already knew. My cameras are completely legal." Her smile did not waver. "Legal under state law, perhaps, but they still violate our community standards. I am here to inform you that you have 7 days to remove all exterior cameras from your property, or the HOA will begin fining you $500 per day until they are gone." I stared at her, genuinely shocked by the audacity. "Karen, there is nothing in the HOA bylaws that prohibits security cameras. I have checked multiple times. Section 12, subsection 4. All exterior modifications must maintain the aesthetic harmony of the community. Your cameras are an eyesore and detract from the uniform appearance we have worked so hard to maintain." That clause is about major modifications. Cameras are standard security features that half the neighborhood already has. Those residents received pre-approval. You did not. She pulled a folded paper from her designer handbag and handed it to me. It was an official-looking notice on HOA letterhead, detailing the alleged violation and the penalties. "This is insane. I am not removing my security system." Karen's expression hardened. "Then you will be fined. The HOA board meets next Tuesday evening at 7. You are welcome to plead your case, but I can assure you the decision has already been made. This community has standards, Mr. Iverson, and you will comply with them or face the consequences." She turned on her heel and walked away, her wedge sandals clicking against the concrete. I watched her go, my mind already racing through my options. This was not just about cameras anymore. This was about a power-hungry HOA president who thought she could bully residents into submission. I spent the next 3 days gathering evidence. I printed out the HOA bylaws and highlighted every relevant section. I took photos of at least 15 other homes in Desert Ridge estates that had visible security cameras, many of them even more prominent than mine. I researched Arizona state law on HOA enforcement and discovered that associations could not impose arbitrary rules that conflicted with state statutes. And most importantly, I found case law from a 2019 Arizona Supreme Court decision that explicitly protected homeowners' rights to install security cameras on their own property, as long as they did not invade others' privacy. By the time Tuesday evening rolled around, I had a binder full of documentation and a growing determination to fight this all the way to court if necessary. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sprawling building with a pool, fitness center, and conference room. When I arrived at 6:45, several other residents were already there, most of them looking bored or resigned. Karen sat at the head of a long table with 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them, Mark Sullivan, a retired accountant who lived 3 streets over, and Patricia Chen, a real estate agent who had sold me my house. The other 2 were strangers to me. The meeting began with mundane business, approval of last month's minutes, a discussion about resurfacing the tennis courts, complaints about dog waste in the common areas. I sat through it all, my binder resting on my lap, waiting for my turn. Finally, Karen cleared her throat and looked directly at me. Item 7 on the agenda. The violation notice issued to Connor Iverson for unauthorized exterior modifications, specifically the installation of multiple security cameras without board approval. I stood up, binder in hand. I would like to address this. Karen's smile was thin. You will have 3 minutes to state your case. First, I want to point out that there is nothing in our HOA bylaws that explicitly prohibits security cameras. Section 12, subsection 4, which Mrs. Rothwell cited, refers to major modifications that alter the appearance of the home. Security cameras are minor, functional additions that do not change the structure or aesthetic of the property in any significant way. I opened my binder and pulled out the photos I had taken. Second, I have documented at least 15 homes in this community that have security cameras, many of them more visible than mine. If the board is going to enforce this alleged rule, it needs to do so consistently, not selectively. Mark Sullivan leaned forward, examining the photos. He has a point, Karen. The Johnsons have cameras all over their front yard. Karen's expression tightened. Those residents submitted applications and received approval. I would like to see those applications, I said, because I suspect they do not exist. And even if they do, the process was never communicated to me or outlined in any official HOA documentation. Patricia Chen nodded slowly. Connor, I sold you that house, and I do not remember anything in the disclosure about needing approval for security cameras. That is a pretty standard thing these days. I pulled out another set of documents. Third, Arizona state law protects homeowners' rights to install security measures on their property. There is a 2019 state Supreme Court case that specifically addressed this issue. HOAs cannot prohibit security cameras that are installed on the homeowner's property and do not invade the privacy of others. One of the board members I did not know, a middle-aged man with graying hair, spoke up. Can I see that case law? I handed him the printout. He read through it, his eyebrows rising. This is pretty clear. The court ruled that HOAs cannot restrict security cameras as long as they comply with state privacy laws. Karen snatched the paper from him. This is irrelevant. Our bylaws clearly state that all exterior modifications require approval. But they do not define cameras as modifications requiring approval, I countered. And you cannot retroactively create a rule to target a specific resident. That is selective enforcement and could be considered harassment. The room fell silent. I could see several board members exchanging uncomfortable glances. Mark Sullivan finally spoke. Karen, I think we need to table this and consult with our HOA attorney. If state law protects this, we could be opening ourselves up to a lawsuit. Karen's face flushed red. The rules are the rules. If we allow one person to do whatever they want, the entire community will descend into chaos. Installing security cameras is not chaos, Patricia said firmly. It is common sense. Half the people in this room probably have them. Several residents nodded. One woman near the back raised her hand. I have cameras, and nobody ever said I needed approval. Why is Connor being singled out? Because his cameras are excessive and intrusive, Karen snapped. He has them pointed at the street, which means they are recording everyone who walks by. That is not true, I said, pulling out my phone. I can show you right now exactly what my cameras see. They are angled specifically to cover my property only. I am not recording the sidewalk or the street. I opened the app for my security system and held up my phone, showing the live feed. The angles were clear. Each camera was focused on my doors, my driveway, or my backyard. There was no view of my neighbors' homes or the public sidewalk. Mark Sullivan studied the screen. That looks completely reasonable to me. The meeting devolved into a heated debate, with Karen insisting I was in violation and the other board members increasingly skeptical. Finally, Patricia made a motion to dismiss the violation notice pending a legal review. Mark seconded it, and despite Karen's furious objections, the motion passed 3-2. I walked out of that meeting feeling vindicated but also wary. Karen Rothwell was not the type to back down, and I had just embarrassed her in front of the entire board and a room full of residents. This was not over. I was right. 2 days later, I received another notice, this time claiming my front yard landscaping did not meet HOA standards because I had allowed weeds to grow in the decorative rock beds. I went outside and inspected every inch of my landscaping. There were no weeds. The rocks were pristine, and the desert plants I had installed were thriving. I took photos and sent a formal rebuttal to the HOA, citing the false nature of the complaint. A week after that, I got a violation for leaving my trash cans visible from the street. The problem was, I had not put my trash cans out that day. It was not even trash day. I checked my security footage and confirmed that my cans had been in my garage the entire time. Someone was making up violations to harass me. I started documenting everything. Every notice, every photo, every piece of evidence that proved the complaints were baseless. I also started researching Karen Rothwell. It turned out she had a history of targeting residents she did not like. I found online forum posts from other Desert Ridge Estates homeowners complaining about her authoritarian approach and arbitrary enforcement of rules. One couple had even moved out after she fined them into the ground over a dispute about their mailbox. I was not going to let that happen to me. I contacted a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes, a sharp woman named Lisa Garrett, who had a reputation for taking on overreaching associations. She reviewed my case and smiled. "This is textbook harassment," she said during our first meeting in her Phoenix office. "Karen Rothwell is clearly targeting you because you stood up to her. The good news is you have an excellent case. The bad news is HOA litigation can be expensive and time-consuming." "I do not care," I said. "I am not letting her drive me out of my home." Lisa nodded approvingly. "Then let us fight back. I'm going to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop issuing baseless violation notices. If they continue, we will file a lawsuit for harassment and selective enforcement." The cease and desist letter went out the next day. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen doubled down. Instead of backing off, she scheduled an emergency board meeting and pushed through a new rule requiring all exterior cameras to be approved by the Architectural Review Committee, which she chaired. Then she sent me a notice stating that my cameras were now in violation of this new rule, and I had 10 days to remove them or face fines. Lisa was livid when I forwarded her the notice. "She cannot do this. You cannot create a rule specifically to target one resident. That is illegal." So what do? We go to court. I am filing an injunction to stop the HOA from enforcing this rule, and we are going to seek damages for harassment. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. The HOA responded by hiring their own attorney, a slick corporate lawyer who tried to argue that the association had the right to regulate the appearance of the community. But Lisa was relentless. She presented the evidence of selective enforcement, the documented harassment, and the state law protecting homeowners' rights to security cameras. The preliminary hearing was held in Maricopa County Superior Court on a sweltering July morning. Judge Harold Mitchell, A no-nonsense man in his 60s, presided. Karen and the HOA attorney sat on one side of the courtroom, looking confident. Lisa and I sat on the other, armed with binders of evidence. Lisa presented our case methodically. She showed the photos of other homes with cameras, the timeline of escalating harassment, and the retroactive rule change designed to target me specifically. She cited the Arizona Supreme Court precedent and argued that the HOA was violating both state law and their own bylaws. The HOA attorney tried to paint me as a troublemaker who refused to follow community standards, but his argument fell apart when Lisa produced the fake violation notices. She had cross-referenced each complaint with my security footage, proving that several of the alleged violations had never occurred. Judge Mitchell listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. When both sides had finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This case is troubling," he said. "It is clear to me that Mr. Iverson has been subjected to selective enforcement and harassment. The evidence shows that multiple homes in this community have security cameras, yet only Mr. Iverson has been targeted for enforcement. Furthermore, the HOA's attempt to create a retroactive rule specifically to penalize him is improper and potentially illegal." Karen's face went pale. The judge continued, "Arizona law is clear. Homeowners have the right to install security cameras on their property as long as those cameras do not invade the privacy of others. Mr. Iverson's cameras are clearly visible, properly angled, and only monitor his own property. The HOA cannot prohibit them under the guise of aesthetic standards." He turned to the HOA attorney. "I am granting the injunction. The HOA is prohibited from enforcing the new camera rule and from issuing any further violation notices to Mr. Iverson regarding his security system. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to reimburse Mr. Iverson for his legal fees and to pay damages in the amount of $10,000 for harassment and emotional distress." I felt a wave of relief and triumph. Lisa squeezed my shoulder, a rare smile on her professional face. Karen looked like she had been slapped. She tried to argue, but the judge cut her off. "Mrs. Rothwell, I strongly suggest you familiarize yourself with Arizona HOA law before you attempt to enforce rules that do not exist. This court does not look kindly on associations that abuse their authority. You are dismissed." The victory felt amazing, but I knew it would not solve the underlying problem. Karen was still HOA president, and she still had power over the community. I needed to make sure she could not retaliate further. Over the next few weeks, I started attending every HOA meeting and encouraging other residents to do the same. I reached out to the people I had seen nodding in agreement during that first meeting, and I discovered a growing undercurrent of frustration with Karen's leadership. People were tired of arbitrary rules, excessive fines, and the constant threat of violation notices. By September, a group of us had organized a petition to recall Karen from the board. Arizona HOA law allowed for the removal of board members through a vote of the homeowners, and we had more than enough signatures to trigger an election. Karen fought back, sending nasty emails and threatening legal action, but she could not stop the democratic process. The recall election was held in October, and the turnout was unprecedented. Residents who had never attended a meeting before showed up to vote. When the ballots were counted, Karen lost by a landslide. She was removed from the board, along with one of her allies who had consistently voted with her. The new board president was Patricia Chen, the real estate agent who had sold me my house and who had been one of the few voices of reason during my ordeal. One of her first acts was to formally rescind the camera rule and issue a public apology to me for the harassment I had endured. But the story did not end there. A few weeks after Karen's removal, I received a disturbing notification from my security system. Someone had tried to tamper with one of my cameras in the middle of the night. The footage showed a figure in dark clothing approaching the camera mounted near my garage and attempting to spray paint over the lens. The motion detection had triggered a bright floodlight, and the person had fled before completing the vandalism. I called the police immediately. When the officers arrived and reviewed the footage, they were able to zoom in on the person's face during the moment the floodlight activated. It was Karen. The officer grimaced as he watched the replay. "That is pretty clear evidence of vandalism and trespassing. Do you want to press charges?" "Absolutely." A warrant was issued for Karen's arrest. She was picked up 2 days later and charged with criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism. The judge set bail at $5,000, and Karen spent a night in jail before her husband posted bond. The criminal trial was held in November. The evidence was overwhelming. My security footage showed Karen clearly attempting to vandalize my property, and her motive was well documented through the months of HOA harassment. Her attorney tried to argue that she was simply checking the camera because she thought it might be malfunctioning, but the jury did not buy it. She was convicted of both charges and sentenced to 6 months of probation, a $1,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service. But the real revelation came during the investigation. As the police dug deeper into Karen's activities, they discovered that she had been embezzling HOA funds for over 2 years. She had been approving fake invoices from a landscaping company owned by her brother, funneling tens of thousands of dollars out of the community's reserve fund. The HOA hired a forensic accountant who confirmed the embezzlement totaled nearly $80,000. Karen was arrested again, this time on felony theft charges. The case made local news, with headlines like "HOA President Arrested for Embezzling from Scottsdale Community" plastered across Phoenix news outlets. The criminal trial for the embezzlement charges took place the following spring. I attended as a witness, providing testimony about the pattern of harassment and retaliation that had led to the discovery of her crimes. The prosecution argued that Karen had targeted me so aggressively because she was afraid my scrutiny of HOA operations would expose her theft. The evidence was damning. Bank records, forged invoices, and testimony from her brother, who had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, all painted a clear picture of fraud. Karen was convicted on multiple counts of theft and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA. Standing in that courtroom, watching Karen Rothwell being led away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Vindication. But also a kind of sadness that it had come to this. If she had just left me alone, if she had not been so obsessed with control and power, she might never have been caught. After the trial, life in Desert Ridge Estates slowly returned to normal. The HOA reformed its bylaws to include better oversight and transparency measures. Patricia Chen proved to be an excellent board president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. The embezzled funds were gradually recovered through the restitution payments and an insurance claim. As for me, my cameras stayed exactly where they were, and nobody ever complained about them again. I even upgraded my system, adding a few more sensors and integrating everything with a new AI-powered home automation platform I had been developing at work. My house became a showcase for smart home technology, and several neighbors asked me to help them set up their own systems. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, even when it feels easier to back down. It also showed me the importance of community and how collective action can challenge abuse of power. The residents of Desert Ridge Estates had been living under Karen's thumb for years, but once someone stood up to her, others found the courage to do the same. I still live in that house today, and I still love it. The desert views are spectacular. The community is thriving under better leadership, and my security cameras keep a watchful eye over everything. Every now and then, when I get a notification from my doorbell camera, I remember that morning when the police showed up because a vindictive HOA president called the cops on my smart home tech. And I remember the judge saying those beautiful words that validated everything I had been fighting for. Visible cameras are legal. The months that followed the trial brought unexpected changes to my life and to the community. With Karen gone and the embezzlement scandal behind us, Desert Ridge Estates began to feel like an actual neighborhood rather than a place under authoritarian rule. People started talking to each other again, hosting block parties, organizing community garage sales. It was remarkable how much the atmosphere shifted once the constant threat of arbitrary fines and violation notices disappeared. Patricia Chen turned out to be exactly the kind of leader the community needed. She ran board meetings efficiently and fairly, soliciting input from residents, and making decisions based on common sense rather than personal vendettas. One of her first initiatives was to create a transparent budget system where homeowners could see exactly how their HOA fees were being spent. She also established a proper architectural review process with clear guidelines and reasonable timelines, eliminating the ambiguity that had allowed Karen to selectively enforce rules. My role in exposing Karen's corruption made me somewhat of a local celebrity, though I tried to downplay it. Neighbors would stop me during evening walks to thank me for standing up to her, sharing their own horror stories of harassment and unreasonable fines they had endured over the years. One elderly couple told me they had been cited for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their window trim, forced to repaint the entire exterior of their house at a cost of thousands of dollars. A single mother recounted how Karen had threatened to file liens against her property over a $50 fine for leaving her children's bikes in the front yard overnight. These stories reinforced my belief that what I had done was necessary. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining property values and community standards, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants when proper oversight does not exist. The system needs checks and balances, just like any other form of governance. My smart home technology became a topic of fascination for many residents. I started hosting informal workshops at the community clubhouse, teaching neighbors how to install and configure their own security systems, smart thermostats, and automated lighting. It was satisfying to share my knowledge and help people feel safer and more comfortable in their homes. Several attendees were elderly residents who appreciated the peace of mind that came with being able to monitor their property remotely or receive alerts if something unusual happened. One particularly memorable workshop involved helping Mrs. Alina Patterson, an 83-year-old widow who lived alone, set up a comprehensive smart home system. She was initially skeptical about the technology, worried it would be too complicated, but I walked her through each step patiently. By the end of the afternoon, she was gleefully checking her phone to see who was at her front door and adjusting her thermostat from her bedroom. A week later, she called me in tears of gratitude. Her system had alerted her to a water leak in her laundry room in the middle of the night, allowing her to shut off the water before serious damage occurred. "You probably saved me $10,000 in repairs," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "And more importantly, you helped me feel safe again. I have been so worried about being here alone, but now I feel like I have eyes everywhere." Moments like that made the entire ordeal with Karen worthwhile. What had started as a fight to protect my own rights had evolved into something bigger, a movement toward empowering homeowners with technology and knowledge. The legal aftermath of Karen's crimes continued to unfold throughout that year. Her brother, who had been complicit in the embezzlement scheme, pleaded guilty to fraud charges and received 18 months in prison. The landscaping company they had used as a front was dissolved, and its assets were seized to help pay restitution. Karen's husband filed for divorce shortly after her conviction, claiming he had no knowledge of her criminal activities. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, caught in the wreckage of his wife's actions. The civil lawsuit that the HOA filed against Karen to recover the embezzled funds moved slowly through the court system. Her assets, including the expensive SUV she had driven and various luxury items purchased with stolen money, were liquidated. Her house went into foreclosure when she could no longer make the mortgage payments from prison. It was a dramatic fall from the position of power she had once held. During this period, I received an unexpected call from a producer at a local Phoenix news station. They wanted to do a feature story about smart home security and HOA disputes, using my case as the centerpiece. I was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but Lisa Garrett encouraged me to do it. "Your story can help other people who are being harassed by their HOAs," she said. "And it highlights important issues about homeowner rights that a lot of people do not understand." I agreed to the interview, which was filmed at my house. The segment aired during the evening news and included footage of my security system, interviews with me and Patricia Chen, and commentary from Lisa about Arizona HOA law. The response was overwhelming. My phone started ringing with calls from people across the Phoenix metro area who were dealing with similar issues with their own HOAs. Some wanted advice, others wanted referrals to attorneys, and a few just wanted to vent about their frustrations. The news segment also caught the attention of the Arizona State Legislature. A representative from Scottsdale reached out to me, interested in using my case as a catalyst for HOA reform legislation. He invited me to testify at a committee hearing about a proposed bill that would strengthen homeowner protections and increase transparency requirements for associations. I drove down to the state capitol on a crisp February morning, nervous but determined. The hearing room was filled with people on both sides of the issue. HOA management companies and some board members opposed the bill, arguing it would make community governance too difficult. But homeowners who had been victimized by overreaching associations, like me, spoke passionately in favor of reform. My testimony focused on the need for clear limits on HOA authority, particularly regarding security cameras and other safety measures. I explained how Karen had weaponized ambiguous bylaws to harass me, and how the existing system had allowed her to embezzle funds without oversight. I emphasized that reasonable HOA governance was important, but unchecked power inevitably led to abuse. The committee members asked thoughtful questions about the balance between community standards and individual rights. I could tell that some were skeptical of increased regulation, worried about unintended consequences, but others seemed genuinely moved by the stories they heard that day. The bill eventually passed, though in a somewhat watered-down form after negotiations with various interest groups. It required HOAs to provide detailed financial reports to homeowners annually, established clearer procedures for architectural review processes, and explicitly protected homeowners' rights to install security cameras on their property. It was not everything reformers wanted, but it was a significant step forward. Back in Desert Ridge Estates, life continued to improve under the new board leadership. The community used some of the recovered embezzlement funds to make long overdue improvements, resurfacing the pool deck, upgrading the fitness center equipment, and installing better lighting along the walking paths. These were the kinds of things HOA fees should have been funding all along, rather than lining Karen's pockets. I found myself becoming more involved in community governance, attending board meetings regularly and volunteering for various committees. It was not something I had anticipated when I bought my house, but the experience with Karen had shown me the importance of engaged citizenship at all levels, even in something as seemingly mundane as a homeowner association. One evening in late spring, about 18 months after the initial confrontation over my cameras, I was sitting on my back patio watching the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed with a notification from my doorbell camera. I glanced at the screen, half expecting to see a package delivery or a neighbor out for a walk. Instead, I saw Patricia Chen standing at my front door, holding what appeared to be a bottle of wine and a greeting card. I walked around to let her in. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said with a warm smile. "I wanted to drop this off personally." I invited her in, curious. She handed me the card, and I opened it to find it was signed by dozens of residents. The messages varied, but they all expressed gratitude for what I had done, for standing up to Karen, for helping reform the HOA, for making Desert Ridge Estates feel like a real community again. "We also wanted to give you this," Patricia said, handing me a framed certificate. It was a humorous Community Hero Award with my name and a tongue-in-cheek description of my brave defense against tyrannical HOA overreach. I laughed, genuinely touched. "This is amazing. Thank you." "No, thank you," Patricia said seriously. "You could have just removed the cameras and avoided all the hassle. A lot of people would have taken the easy way out. But you fought back, and in doing so, you exposed corruption that might have continued for years. You made this place better for all of us." We sat on the patio, sharing the wine and talking about the community's future. Patricia mentioned that elections for the board were coming up again and encouraged me to consider running. I told her I would think about it, though I was not sure I wanted that level of responsibility. As she left, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey I had been on. A simple decision to install security cameras had spiraled into a legal battle, a criminal investigation, state legislative testimony, and ultimately meaningful change in my community. It had been stressful and expensive, and at times overwhelming, but it had also been deeply rewarding in ways I had not expected. The technology that had started this whole saga continued to evolve. My smart home system grew more sophisticated, incorporating new sensors and AI capabilities that made the house feel almost alive. I published several articles about home automation and security, drawing on my experiences to help others navigate the intersection of technology and homeowner rights. A few tech blogs picked up my story, and I was invited to speak at a conference in Las Vegas about smart home innovation and legal considerations. Summer arrived in full force, bringing the brutal Arizona heat that sent temperatures soaring above 115 degrees. My smart thermostat and automated shade system kept the house comfortable while minimizing energy costs. The cameras continued their vigilant watch, though thankfully the only drama they captured these days was the occasional javelina wandering through the yard or packages being delivered. One afternoon in July, I received a letter from the Arizona Department of Corrections. My first thought was that it had something to do with Karen, but when I opened it, I found something unexpected. It was a letter from Karen herself, handwritten and several pages long. I sat down to read it, unsure what to expect. The letter began with an apology, awkward and defensive at first, but gradually becoming more genuine. She acknowledged the harassment, the false violations, the vandalism attempt. She admitted that her behavior had been driven by a need for control that stemmed from her own insecurities and personal problems. She explained that embezzling the money had started small, just a little here and there to cover unexpected expenses, but had spiraled out of control as she got away with it. Karen wrote about her time in prison, the therapy she was receiving, and the painful process of confronting what she had done. She said she understood if I could never forgive her, but she wanted me to know that she took full responsibility for her actions and was genuinely sorry for the harm she had caused. The letter ended with an unexpected statement. She wrote that in a twisted way, she was grateful I had stood up to her, because it had forced her to confront her behavior and ultimately led to her getting help for issues she had been avoiding for years. She said she hoped that, when she was released, she could find a way to make amends and become a better person. I read the letter twice, processing the complex emotions it stirred up. Anger at what she had put me through, but also a reluctant compassion for someone who had destroyed her own life through her actions. I decided to write back, keeping it brief but acknowledging her apology. I did not offer forgiveness, not yet, but I told her I hoped she found the healing she was seeking. Whether Karen would actually change remained to be seen, but the letter reminded me that even in the midst of conflict, people are complicated and capable of growth. It also reinforced my belief in the importance of accountability. Karen was facing the consequences of her actions, but she was also being given an opportunity to change, and that seemed like the right balance. As fall approached and the desert heat finally began to moderate, I made a decision. I would run for the HOA board, not because I wanted power or control, but because I had learned firsthand how important good governance was and how much damage bad leadership could cause. Patricia was thrilled when I told her, and she immediately offered to endorse my candidacy. The election campaign was surprisingly enjoyable. I focused on transparency, common sense rule enforcement, and using technology to improve communication between the board and residents. I proposed creating a community app where homeowners could submit maintenance requests, view financial reports, and receive real-time updates about community events. Several other candidates ran on similar platforms, a new generation of leaders who had been inspired to get involved after seeing the corruption exposed. When the votes were counted in November, I won a seat on the board along with two other reform-minded candidates. Our first meeting in December was a stark contrast to the tense, adversarial gatherings of the Karen era. We discussed actual issues, listened to resident concerns, and made decisions collaboratively. It felt like how local governance should work. One of our first initiatives was to install community-wide security cameras in common areas, with clear signage and a privacy policy. The irony was not lost on me. The very technology that Karen had tried to prohibit was now being embraced as a community asset. The cameras helped reduce vandalism in the parks and parking areas and gave residents an added sense of security. Winter brought cooler temperatures and the busy holiday season. I hosted a Christmas party at my house, inviting neighbors and board members. The smart home system impressed guests with automated holiday lighting displays and perfectly controlled temperature zones. More importantly, the party brought together people who might not otherwise interact, strengthening the bonds that make a community more than just a collection of houses. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that morning when police showed up at my door because of Karen's complaint. What could have been a simple dispute over cameras had become a catalyst for profound change, not just in my community, but potentially across the state, through the legislative reforms that followed. I had learned that standing up for your rights, even when it is difficult and expensive, matters not just for yourself, but for others who might be facing similar challenges. I had discovered that technology, when used thoughtfully, can empower people and create safer, more connected communities. And I had been reminded that governance, even at the level of a homeowner association, requires vigilance and participation from citizens who care about fairness and accountability. The cameras mounted on my house continued their quiet vigil, recording nothing more dramatic than the daily routines of suburban life. They had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that visibility and transparency are essential to preventing abuse of power. Judge Mitchell's ruling that visible cameras are legal had been vindicated not just in my case, but in the broader principle it represented. Homeowners have the right to protect their property and themselves, and no association should be able to take that away. As I stood in my front yard on New Year's Eve, watching fireworks light up the desert sky, I felt genuinely grateful for the journey I had been on, even the difficult parts. My house was more than just a building. It was a home in a community that had been transformed by the courage to challenge injustice. And that was worth fighting for. The cameras kept recording, the smart home systems kept humming along, and life in Desert Ridge Estates continued on a better path than before. Karen Rothwell was serving her sentence, hopefully finding redemption. The community was thriving under ethical leadership. And I had discovered a sense of purpose in using my skills and experience to help others. Sometimes the smallest act of resistance, like refusing to remove a few security cameras, can lead to ripples of change that extend far beyond what you could have imagined. That was the unexpected gift that came from fighting back against HOA overreach, a reminder that every person has the power to make a difference when they choose to stand up for what is right. The story that began with a Karen calling the cops on my smart home tech had ended with meaningful reform, community transformation, and a personal journey that changed how I understood citizenship and responsibility. And through it all, those cameras, those perfectly legal, properly positioned, visible cameras, stood as silent witnesses to the power of refusing to be bullied and the importance of fighting for your rights, even when the opponent seems to hold all the cards.